The late afternoon air in Denver always has a faint sharpness in early spring, the kind that wakes you up just stepping out the door. As Lily and I got out of the car and walked up the stone path to her sister's house, I tried to shake off the tension that had been building between us all week. Her sister's place was nestled among rows of identical houses, their lawns still brown and thawing from the winter. I carried a bottle of wine we'd picked up on the way, more out of obligation than enthusiasm, and Lily was already fussing with her phone, typing out a quick message with an absent smile on her lips. Inside, the smell of roasted chicken and potatoes wafted through the entryway. Lily's sister, Marianne, greeted us at the door with her usual dramatic flair, wide arms, a too loud laugh, and a quick kiss on the cheek for both of us. "You're late," she teased, though it was only by 5 minutes. The house was alive with voices and the scraping of chairs, kids running back and forth through the hallway, and someone yelling from the kitchen about a forgotten salad. I helped Lily off with her coat, and as I did, that sharp note of cologne hit me. It was spicy, musky, definitely masculine, and definitely not my scent. For a second, I hesitated, holding the fabric up as if to check for a label, but Lily turned away too quickly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Hang that up, will you?" she said, already drifting toward the living room, waving at her niece with the hand that had been clutching her phone. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone at work had gotten too close. Maybe it was a trick of my own paranoia. Still, as I hung the jacket on the crowded rack, I found myself sniffing my own sleeve for comparison, searching for any excuse. Dinner at Marianne's was always a loud affair. Her husband, Brian, was already pouring drinks, recounting some story from his office that had everyone laughing. Lily jumped into the conversation, sliding into her role as the witty, charming sister-in-law, but I noticed she didn't look at me once. Even when I sat down beside her, her body angled away just slightly, a subtle but unmistakable distance. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself to the bathroom, trying to clear my head and steady the growing unease in my chest. I splashed cold water on my face and looked up to see my own tired eyes staring back at me in the mirror. That's when I spotted it, a deep blue silk tie, neatly folded but clearly forgotten, perched on the edge of the vanity. At first, I thought maybe Brian had left it, but the monogram was unmistakable. No one in Lily's family had those initials, and it was far too new, the silk gleaming in the bathroom light. My heart started racing. I picked up the tie, inspecting it for any clue, any rational explanation. When I rejoined the group, I slipped into the seat beside Lily and waited for the right moment. It didn't take long. Marianne called everyone to the table for dinner, her kids already arguing about who would get the first slice of garlic bread. Just before we started eating, I leaned toward Lily, holding out the tie under the table where only she could see it. "You forgot something in the bathroom," I said quietly. She glanced down, barely blinking. Her reaction was a masterclass in composure. She took the tie, slipped it into her bag, and whispered back, "Oh, that's just from work. One of the guys left it behind after a meeting, and I meant to return it. Thanks for finding it, I would have hated to lose it." Then, before I could respond, she turned to Marianne and launched into a story about her latest project, leaving me with my doubts and a forced smile. Dinner itself was a blur. I pushed food around my plate, only half listening to the conversation. Brian tried to drag me into a discussion about hiking trails near Boulder, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying the cologne, the tie, the way Lily hadn't looked at me since we'd arrived. I scanned her face for any sign of guilt or discomfort, but she was impossible to read. Her laughter sounded genuine, her anecdotes effortless, but I could see the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth whenever she thought no one was watching. At one point, Lily reached over and tried to squeeze my hand in front of the family, her smile just a little too wide. I pulled away, voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter anymore after yesterday." The words slipped out, quiet but sharp, and for a moment I saw her composure crack. She gave a tight, nervous smile, her eyes darting toward Marianne as if hoping no one had noticed. But they had. There was a brief lull in the conversation, the kind that lingers a half-second too long, just enough for everyone to register that something was wrong. Marianne started talking about her upcoming vacation a little too loudly, and Brian filled our glasses with more wine than usual. The kids retreated to the living room and the mood never quite recovered. I tried to keep up appearances, nodding and smiling when required, but inside I was already somewhere else. The clink of cutlery and the murmur of voices felt distant, muffled by the storm building in my head. Every time Lily glanced my way, I saw the flicker of worry she was trying so hard to hide. After dinner, while everyone gathered in the living room for dessert and coffee, I excused myself again, stepping outside onto the back porch. The cool air helped, but only a little. Through the window, I could see Lily laughing at something her niece had said, her face illuminated by the soft yellow light. From this distance, she looked like the same woman I'd married, confident, lively, the center of every room. But now I wondered how much of that was real and how much was just another performance. I stared at the suburban darkness for a while, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, replaying the evening over and over. The cologne, the tie, her effortless explanations, it all felt too easy, too practiced. I wondered how many times she'd had to come up with stories like that, how many times I'd chosen not to notice. When I finally went back inside, Lily was waiting for me by the door, coat already in hand. "Ready to go?" she asked, her voice just a touch too bright. "Yeah," I replied, avoiding her eyes. "Let's go." We said our goodbyes, made our excuses, and stepped out into the cold Denver night. As we drove home in silence, I stared out the window at the streetlights blurring past, the world outside moving on as if nothing had changed. But I knew better. Something fundamental had shifted and there was no way to turn back. After we returned home, the house felt quieter than usual. The cold of the evening seemed to seep through the walls, making everything feel distant. Lily was already in the kitchen, sorting through the mail, her movements mechanical as she murmured a quick hello. The silence that stretched between us was thick and suffocating, far more intense than any argument we'd ever had. It was as though the words we should have spoken had already been swallowed, leaving nothing but a void. I stood by the front door for a moment longer than necessary, just staring at the doorknob as if it could somehow give me the answers I needed. Everything felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I hadn't been wrong about the tie or the cologne. And yet I still found myself second-guessing every thought that came to me. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I had imagined the look in her eyes when I said it doesn't matter anymore after yesterday. Maybe it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There had been too many small signs, too many little things that had started to add up over the past few months. The more I thought about it, the more I could see them clearly. Lily's behavior had changed gradually, and yet I had missed it, dismissed it until now. I remember how a few months ago she started working late more often, but I just figured she was dedicated to her job. "It's a big project," she would say, her voice always tired but determined. But there was no explanation for why she hadn't mentioned any of these late-night meetings until I asked. She'd tell me it was a work crisis or that she had to finish something for a deadline. She would brush off my questions like they were nothing, but I couldn't ignore the fact that her evenings had slowly become empty spaces. No more cozy nights with movies or spontaneous dinners. It was always too tired or too busy. At first, I thought it was a phase, just work stress. But now, the pattern was undeniable. When she wasn't working, she was off somewhere else. Somewhere I wasn't. She wore new clothes, outfits I'd never seen her wear before, like she was trying to dress differently, as if she was trying to be someone else. I couldn't remember the last time we took a photo together, and when I brought it up, she always had an excuse. "I've been so busy, babe. I don't even have time to look at myself in the mirror, let alone take a picture." And there was the phone. Her phone had always been a bit of a mystery, but now it was like a fortress. She used to leave it lying around, her texts visible if I happened to glance at them. But recently her phone was always locked, tucked away out of sight, even when we were sitting together at dinner or watching a show. If a message popped up, she'd hurriedly swipe it away like it was something to hide. The notifications became more frequent, though she'd always quickly swipe the screen away as though afraid I might see something. I remember one evening in particular. I had come home a little earlier than usual, wanting to surprise her. She had told me she was going to a workout session, but when she walked through the door, her hair was styled, her makeup perfect as if she had been at a meeting, not a gym. She didn't seem out of breath, didn't look the least bit sweaty. I didn't say anything right away, but I couldn't ignore the growing suspicion in my chest. I didn't want to believe it, but everything started pointing in one direction. I had been missing the signs for so long, hadn't been paying attention to the little things. It wasn't until that night, until dinner at her sister's, that everything finally clicked. I replayed that dinner in my head over and over, the way Lily had laughed too loudly, the way her smile seemed forced. How, when I whispered to her, she'd brushed me off so quickly. The tie in the bathroom, the unfamiliar cologne, it was all adding up, but I still couldn't bring myself to confront her directly. I wasn't ready to face the truth, to admit that the woman I had trusted for so many years might be hiding something that shattered everything I thought I knew about our life. The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became. Lily's avoidance wasn't just a phase. It wasn't just a temporary shift in her routine. It was a symptom of something deeper, something I couldn't ignore any longer. It was a betrayal. I wasn't sure when it had started or how long it had been going on, but the cracks in our marriage were too wide to deny anymore. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was still quiet, but the silence was different now. It felt more oppressive, as though the air itself was holding its breath. I could hear the soft sound of Lily moving in the bathroom, getting ready for another long day at work. She didn't say anything to me when she came out, didn't even glance in my direction. It was like we were strangers sharing the same space, both pretending that everything was fine, pretending that nothing had changed. As I stood in the kitchen pouring coffee into my mug, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been blind for too long. How had I missed all the signs? How had I allowed this slow drift to happen without noticing how far apart we had grown? I was angry with myself for not seeing it sooner, for not confronting the suspicion when it was still a whisper in my mind. Now it was a scream, loud and undeniable, filling every corner of the house. I needed answers. I needed to know if I had been living a lie. But I also knew, deep down, that I wasn't ready for what those answers might be. So, I did the only thing I could do at the time. I kept living the lie. I kept pretending. The day passed like any other, with Lily at work and me at the office. We spoke briefly in the evening, but there was nothing of substance, no real connection. The routine was comforting, but it also felt suffocating. I couldn't escape the thoughts that were spiraling in my mind. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to face it. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, I stayed up longer than usual. The silence between us had become deafening, like we were two strangers passing through each other's lives with no real connection. She'd been falling asleep in front of the TV more often recently, and though I tried not to let it bother me, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was intentionally avoiding me, retreating into a world that didn't include me. It was well past midnight when I finally decided to check her phone. I'd never been one to invade her privacy, but something inside me had snapped. I had to know. I had to confirm what I already suspected, even if it destroyed everything I thought I knew. She'd left her phone on the coffee table beside her, face up as usual, an open invitation for my doubts to take root. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of my decision. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hands trembled as I reached for the phone. But there was no turning back now. I unlocked it with the pattern she'd never bothered to hide, and it only took a few seconds to find the message. The text was from a name I didn't recognize, Casey. The message was simple, but the words felt like a punch to my gut. "Best evening, Casey. You're amazing." There was no mistaking it. It was personal. It was an asterisk, mate. And worse, it was a message Lily had sent just hours ago when she was supposed to be working late for some project. I scrolled further, unable to stop myself, despite the rising panic in my chest. There were more messages between them. Photos from a restaurant. Flirty comments. Compliments. One message in particular sent a chill down my spine. "I miss you already. Can't wait to see you again." I couldn't deny it any longer. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, had been having an affair. I felt a coldness wash over me, numbing me from the inside out. The room seemed to grow darker, the walls closing in as the truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had been living a lie for months, maybe longer. I had been blind, foolish enough to ignore the signs because I didn't want to confront the reality of what was happening. But now it was undeniable. Lily had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The message from Casey was the final straw. It wasn't a simple mistake. It wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. No, this was something much more calculated. She had been hiding it from me for months, lying to my face and pretending like everything was fine. And I had let it happen. I pulled my hand away from the phone, suddenly feeling like a stranger in my own home. The floor felt unstable beneath my feet, as though the ground was slipping away from me. I looked over at Lily, still sound asleep on the couch, blissfully unaware of the storm that was raging inside me. How could she lie to me like this? How could she betray everything we had built together? I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at her. My heart ached with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. But there was one thing I knew for certain now: I could never look at her the same way again. The next morning, I didn't wake her. I let her sleep in as I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with all the questions I couldn't answer. What was I supposed to do now? How could I confront her? Did I even want to? I went through the motions of getting ready for work, my mind elsewhere, every thought focused on the revelation from the night before. I had never felt so distant from her, even though she was just a few feet away. She was still sleeping, unaware of the fact that everything had changed. But I knew I couldn't go on like this, pretending that nothing was wrong. It wasn't just about her betrayal anymore, it was about my own self-respect, my dignity. I left the house quietly, the door clicking shut behind me with an echo that felt final. I drove to work in a daze, my mind clouded with anger and confusion. I didn't know what the next step would be, but I knew I couldn't stay in this marriage. Not after what I had seen. Not after everything she had done. At work, I tried to focus, but the image of Lily's messages wouldn't leave me. I felt like a fool, like I had been living in a fantasy for so long, not seeing the truth right in front of me. Every conversation I had, every email I sent, felt meaningless in comparison to the chaos inside my head. I couldn't escape it. By the time the day ended, I was drained mentally and physically. I had been living in a fog of doubt, and now it was time to face it. When I returned home, Lily was already back from work. She was in the kitchen, making dinner, acting as though nothing had changed. As if nothing had been exposed. I stood in the doorway watching her for a moment, unsure of what to do next. She turned to me, her smile faltering slightly when she saw the look on my face. "Hey," she said, her voice too casual, too forced. "How was your day?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over to the table where her phone was sitting, still on, still showing the messages. I picked it up, holding it out to her. "Who's Casey?" I asked, my voice cold. Her eyes widened in surprise, her lips parting as if she was about to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. Then finally she sighed, looking away. I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered. "But it's not what you think." I didn't listen to the rest. I didn't need to. I had already seen enough. The days that followed were a blur. I had always considered myself a patient person, someone who could navigate life's storms with a calm demeanor, but this was different. There was no way to keep pretending that everything was fine, no way to hide the deep fissures that had opened between us. We were strangers sharing a home, passing each other by in silence, our interactions reduced to the bare minimum. Even when we spoke, it was about the most mundane things: grocery lists, bills, reminders to pick up dry cleaning. There was no warmth, no affection. The Macy we once had felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now felt suffocating. Each room seemed to carry the weight of everything unsaid, every broken promise, every betrayal. I spent my evenings locked away in the study, reading through work emails or flipping through old books on the shelf, pretending that nothing had changed, that this wasn't happening. Lily did the same, retreating into her own world. She still went to work every day, still came home every night, but it was like she was living in some parallel universe. There were no more dinners together, no more sharing of moments or thoughts. She stayed in her corner of the house and I stayed in mine. I felt like a ghost, walking through my own life, stuck in a loop of disconnection. There was no confrontation, no explosive argument. It wasn't that we were avoiding it, it was that we both knew the truth. Lily knew I knew, and I knew she was guilty. But there was no need to discuss it. Words would only make it real. Instead, we both lived on autopilot, each of us retreating further into ourselves, unable or unwilling to address the elephant in the room. I remember one night when she asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" Her voice was flat, devoid of the urgency I would have expected. I could see the dullness in her eyes, the lack of emotion behind her words. It wasn't a question anymore, it was a formality. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak without breaking. And so we continued. Day after day, we moved around each other like two people who had lost everything and couldn't figure out how to get it back. The silence between us became a wall I couldn't climb, a distance I couldn't bridge. There were no more tender gestures, no more late-night talks about our dreams or fears. Every action I took was mechanical, every interaction with Lily a performance, a farce that neither of us was willing to acknowledge. But in the quiet of the nights, when I lay awake in bed, staring up at the ceiling, I thought about everything. I thought about the moments when we had been happy, the times when everything had felt right. I remembered when we first met, how effortless it had all been. I remembered the way she had looked at me then, how her touch had felt like home. Now, though, it felt like I was mourning a version of her that no longer existed. I began to change in small ways. I started working longer hours, finding excuses to stay at the office. I immersed myself in my work, hoping that the busyness would drown out the aching emptiness that had taken root in my chest. It didn't help, though. It was like trying to outrun a shadow. No matter how fast I went, it was always right behind me, reminding me of what I had lost. When I wasn't at work, I spent time at the gym. At first, it was just a way to KLL time, to have something to do with my body that wasn't completely numb. But eventually, it became a way to take out my frustration, to push my anger and hurt into physical exertion. I ran on the treadmill, lifting weights until my muscles screamed, and still, it wasn't enough to numb the pain. I needed something to fill the void, something to replace the space Lily had once occupied in my life. I also started keeping a journal. It wasn't something I had ever done before, but for some reason, writing my thoughts down helped me process them. It was a way to make sense of everything that was happening, even if I didn't know what to do with the words. I wrote about the hurt, the confusion, and the anger that had become my constant companions. I wrote about the lies, the betrayal, the endless nights I lay awake wondering if I was ever truly seen by the person I had shared my life with. One of the most painful parts of this experience was how much I had changed. Before all of this, I had been someone who believed in love and loyalty, someone who trusted easily. But now I was a shadow of that person. I was cynical, guarded, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone had the potential to lie, to deceive, to betray. I had lost my sense of who I was, and it terrified me. Lily, meanwhile, seemed to be unaffected by all of this. She went about her daily routine as if nothing had changed. She still spent time with her friends, still went out on weekends, still wore that mask of normalcy. But I could see through it. I could see the cracks, the tiny details that betrayed the lies. She was still seeing Casey, I knew that much. The messages had stopped coming through to her phone, but I could feel the distance between us growing wider, like she was trying to keep up the illusion of a marriage while living a completely different life. We didn't speak about it. There was nothing left to say. The reality was clear, she had made her choice, and I had made mine. We were both living in the same house, but we weren't living together. I thought about leaving. I thought about walking away from everything and starting over, but I wasn't sure how. How do you leave behind years of shared history, of love, of everything that once felt so right? I didn't know how to do that. But what I did know was that I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living in this lie. I couldn't keep sharing space with someone who had broken me so completely. The longer I stayed, the more I lost myself. Weeks passed and things only got worse. It felt like we were two actors in a play we both hated, moving through the motions but lacking any real connection. Lily and I rarely spoke unless we had to, and when we did, it was always about trivial things, the bills, the laundry, the weather. There was no talk of our past, no mention of what we had lost. It was as though we had both agreed without saying a word that this was how life would be from now on, empty, hollow, like we were living in two separate realities. And then, one day, out of nowhere, Lily suggested something I wasn't expecting. She came to me, standing in the doorway of the study where I had been working in silence, and said, maybe we should take a weekend trip. Just the two of us. Go somewhere quiet, relax, try to remember what we had before all of this. I stared at her, unsure of what to say. The audacity of it. After everything, she thought a weekend getaway could fix this? A weekend to remember what we used to have. I felt a strange mix of emotions, a bitter laugh bubbling up inside me, anger, disbelief, and something else too. Was this her way of trying to pretend everything was normal again? Or was she actually trying to salvage what little was left? I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Finally, I looked up from my desk, meeting her gaze. Are you serious? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She seemed taken aback, as if she hadn't expected me to challenge her. She crossed her arms, biting her lip for a moment before saying, I think we both need a break. From everything. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way she was trying to reach out, trying to fix what was broken. But how could I? How could I let myself believe that one weekend, one small gesture, could make up for everything she had done? Could a weekend really make me forget the pain, the lies, and the betrayal? I sighed, rubbing my temples. You think a trip is going to solve everything? That it's going to make all of this go away? She didn't answer immediately, and for a moment we just stood there in silence. I wanted to say so many things, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much I had changed. But I didn't. The words felt hollow, meaningless. Instead, I said, fine. Let's go. Let's go on this trip. My voice was numb, detached, as if I was already checked out of whatever this relationship had become. The weekend trip was a disaster from the moment we left. We drove to a small town about 2 hours away, a place I'd never been but that Lily said she had heard about from a colleague. It was a quiet, almost deserted place, small shops, an old inn, a couple of restaurants. It should have been peaceful, but instead it felt suffocating. Every second felt like an hour, every word exchanged between us felt like an effort. There was no warmth, no connection. It was as if we were two strangers sitting across from each other, trying to fill the silence with meaningless small talk. That night, after dinner, we returned to the hotel and settled into our room. I took a shower, trying to wash off the tension that had been building in my chest. When I came out, I found Lily sitting on the bed, staring down at her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in. I tried to ignore it, but there was something about the way she was acting, the way she was hunched over her phone, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't help it. I had to know. I thought we were supposed to be focusing on us, I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. And you're still on your phone? She glanced up at me, her expression a mix of guilt and frustration. I'm just checking in with work, she said, her voice too casual, as though it was no big deal. It won't take long. But I knew better now. I knew that whatever she was doing wasn't about work. She had been acting distant since we left, her mind somewhere else. I watched her for a few more seconds and then, without thinking, I grabbed her phone from her hands. "Vincent, give that back," she snapped, standing up quickly. Her face was flushed, but I didn't care. I unlocked the phone and scrolled through the messages. And there it was, another message from Casey. It was simple, just a few words: "Miss you. When will we meet again?" The room spun for a moment, and the anger I had been holding back surged forward like a tidal wave. I could feel my hands shaking as I held the phone in front of her. "So this is it, huh? This is how you're going to do it? Pretend everything is fine, act like I don't know what's been going on." Lily stood there, her mouth opening and closing as if she were searching for the right words, but I wasn't giving her a chance. "I'm done," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm done pretending, Lily. I'm done with this." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The guilt was written all over her face, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. "I'm going home," I said, turning toward the door. "You can stay here, but I'm leaving." Lily didn't stop me. She didn't try to convince me otherwise. She just stood there, frozen, as I grabbed my bag and walked out of the hotel room. I drove back home alone that night, the weight of what had just happened settling over me. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. I felt numb, hollow. The realization that everything was over had settled in, and there was no going back. The days after the trip were marked by silence and a gradual disintegration of any pretense we'd held onto. Lily and I barely spoke, our interactions limited to the occasional exchange of necessities, chores, bills, logistics. I moved into the spare bedroom, my belongings spilling across the room as I made the space my own, a personal refuge from the life we'd once shared. Lily started staying out more, her absences becoming longer and less explainable. She would leave early in the morning, return late, and when she was home, she was always on the phone or locked in her own world. I had stopped asking where she went or who she was with. It was clear now that it didn't matter. The trust that had once held us together was shattered, and there was no putting it back together. I found comfort in the small changes I made for myself. I signed up for photography classes, something I'd always wanted to do but had put aside for years. The evenings I once spent waiting for her to return home were now spent capturing the beauty of the world outside, focusing on moments and places I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I started jogging in the mornings too, clearing my mind as I pushed myself to run longer, harder. With each step, I could feel myself moving further from the pain that had consumed me. It was as if every mile was a reminder that I was capable of moving on, of finding a new path even when everything seemed lost. As the weeks turned into months, the emotional weight that had once suffocated me slowly lifted. I was no longer living in the shadow of my marriage, no longer defined by the betrayal I had endured. The house, once filled with tension, now felt like a space I could reclaim. I changed jobs, finding work that brought me a sense of purpose and fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. In late autumn, Lily packed her things without so much as a goodbye. She moved in with a friend, leaving the house behind. There was no confrontation, no final argument, just an empty space where she had once been. I didn't feel anger or sadness. There was no sense of closure, only a strange peace that settled in my chest. It was over, and for the first time in months, I was free. I traveled more, seeing places I had only ever dreamed of. I spent weekends in quiet towns, taking photos of landscapes that felt vast and untainted by the weight of my past. I learned to paint, letting the brushstrokes carry my emotions in ways words never could. I made new friends, met people who saw me for who I was now, not who I had been. When I looked back, I realized that the loss of my marriage, as painful as it had been, had led me to something more genuine, more honest. It had forced me to reconnect with myself in ways I hadn't thought possible. I had chosen myself, and for the first time I was living the life I wanted.